So transforming square root functions, we haven't done transformations in a while, um, but so this is a good review before we do our semester final. So remember the parent function of a square root would just be y equals the square root of x. So y equals the square root of x. And then if you remember, if you look back in your notes, you always have y equals, the a is always out front. Then it's x, and then minus h, and then plus k. So remember, the a is always out front, the h is always inside of the parentheses. Well, in this case, it's just under the square root, and then the k is adding or subtracting at the end. Don't forget the h is always opposite. That's why it's x minus h. So the a value does the same thing. A stretches or compresses. I think I just spelled that wrong. Stretch or compress, that's what I'm going to change it to. And then if it's a negative, it flips over the x-axis. Okay. H is a horizontal shift. And remember, it's opposite. Oops, there's that leftover whiteout. So a negative moves it right, positive moves it left. Okay, and then our k value moves up or down. Positive up, negative down. The only one that's opposite is h. Okay, so if you had y equals the absolute value of x plus 2, so y equals the absolute value of x plus 2, the absolute value, or I said absolute value, I'm sorry, the square root of x plus 2. So if you have the square root, if this 2 is inside or underneath the square root, then it's a horizontal. Since it's a positive, that means we need to move it left 2 units. Remember, you can always use a graphing calculator. So I'm going to grab this one that's close to me. So the absolute value, I'm going to, or dang, I keep saying absolute value. The square root of x, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the x plus 2. Make sure that since it is underneath the square root, you put it under the parentheses, or in the parentheses. I think that the skinny calculators, these colored screen calculators are a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and do it just to make sure. So square root of just x, oh yeah, and then the square root of x plus 2. So that's how you type them in on the 2 different calculators. This one automatically puts it underneath the square root. This one you have to close the parentheses. So now if I hit graph, there's the parent function, and then there is the shifted one. And notice it did shift left like we said. So go ahead and hit second graph so we could get some points. So the parent function, I'm going to go ahead and write the table for the parent function just so that you have it. So the parent function is 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, and I think that's enough. Notice you can't take, remember you can't take the square root of a negative number, so if I hit go up, it's going to tell me error, because you can't take the square root of a negative 1, because remember that's imaginary stuff. So that's the parent function. So if you take those 3 points and just shift them all left 2, so 0, 0, left 2, 1, 2 would be here. 1, 1, so 1, 1, shift it left 2, 1, 2, and then 4, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then left 2. So that's what my shifted would look like. The parent function is at 0, 0, 1, 1, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So that's the parent. And then this one is left 2. So anytime it talks about the description, it's talking about how you moved it. Use words to tell me how it moved. So left 2. I know on the worksheet it's going to talk about domain and range, so let's go ahead and talk about the domain. So the domain of the parent function, so domain, remember, is the possible x values. So if you look, it definitely, for the parent function, tells you error starting at -1. I could keep going, and it's going to just keep giving me numbers. If you look at the graph, it just continues. So parent function for the domain is x has to be greater than or equal to 0. So x is greater than or equal to 0. The range, notice there's nothing below this, so the range is the same thing. X is great, not x, sorry. Range always deals with y. I'm just going to move it over because that's going to be wet for a minute. So range is y is greater than or equal to 0 because it starts here and goes up. It will keep going up. Eventually it will get everywhere. It will just take forever. So this is domain and range of the parent function. Now I'm going to go ahead and do domain and range of the transformed one. So domain for transformed. So when you look at your table, you want to go and you want to look at the x values when it starts saying error. So this one is when x is greater than, so notice x values are now starting at -2 and then they continue. So x is greater than or equal to -2. Okay, and then range. Range didn't change on this one because it still starts here and just keeps going up. So it would be y is greater than or equal to 0. You can always tell how your domain or your range change. If you shift left or right, then the only thing that's going to change is your domain because it deals with the x values. If it moved up, like say this one just shifted up 2 instead of left 2, the only thing that would change is your range because you're changing y values, not x values. X would still start at 0 and continue. The range would just start at 2 and continue. So that is domain and range of the parent function and then transformed.